Welcome to the Stop Suffering in Silence podcast with your host, Denise Walsh and Rachel Timothy.
Hey, you guys. Welcome back to another episode of Stop Suffering in Silence. My name is Denise Walsh, and I'm here with co-host Rachel Timothy. And we have a topic today that we're interested in sharing with you and just having an open discussion about, because in my opinion, this is one of the pieces that often gets missed when we're talking about child sexual abuse and trafficking, etc. Right? Like, oftentimes people want to know, how can this happen, and what red flags did I miss, and how can I protect my child? And this, to be honest, is it. This is the slippery slope that allows and gets the abuse kind of started. But people don't necessarily understand that. So we're going to talk about grooming today and the parts, the slippery slope that grooming is. I am reading from a book called Duck Groom by Anna Sonata. She was a social worker who worked primarily with predators for years and basically took what they said, how they did it, and put it in a book. And it really connects, Rachel, with what we've been saying for years and what you personally experienced.
Yeah. So, and the way that she describes it is probably more like book smart, but throw experiences in the mix. And yeah, it'll help others be able to spot the signs, hopefully before the abuse takes place.
Right. And you asked on our social media yesterday for personal stories from people in our audience that have experienced grooming. And so we'll share some of their experiences throughout today's episode too.
Yeah, and it's always interesting to me, and I knew that how it would turn out, but it's still interesting when you see it all be put in black and white like this, but they're not very different.
Yeah.
They're all very similar.
And that's a lot of what Anna Sonata mentioned. She's like, it's a predictable pattern.
Yes.
And most abusers just do this, and then they find the people that can go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, and so you've mentioned that there could have been people that your coach and your abusers did step 1 and step 2 but didn't necessarily get to step 4 because of multiple reasons. But do you want to shed light on what it looks like to either catch the signs or not? I want to say not be an easy target, essentially.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think when the grooming starts, some of the signs are going to look like just special attention, special privileges, special just out of the ordinary time of an adult with a child, or even an adult with an adult. I mean, there's lots of different ways that grooming can happen. But the way that you're going to spot it is by the person's heart, the child's heart. Who is making them feel special? Who is showing them extra love and attention? Who wants them to keep secrets? Those types of things. But when you're not looking for that, if you're looking for stranger danger, you miss it. If you're not having constant conversations with your kids and knowing who it is that has their heart, you're going to miss it. If you're living in your own trauma and your own, chaos of your world, you might miss it. And that's not to put judgment or blame on somebody, but it's just the truth. Like, those are ways that you can see the signs, is by having a connection yourself with your child's heart and giving them an open space to talk about their heart. Because the first thing that a perpetrator is going to try to steal is the child's heart.
All right, so let's start with step 1, stage 1, setting the trap with compliments. Now, a predator can start with step 1, but if they don't get the child's heart, or if the child has, they don't have time to stay after school, or the parents say no, or things like that, a predator could try, but they're not going to keep going until they succeed in step 1. And then they'll go to step 2, and then they'll go to step 3. So as parents, we can set boundaries for our children that help them say no, or never be one-on-one with an adult or never keep secrets. Like, we can give them healthy structure so they're not even put in these positions to begin with. But step one is setting traps with compliments. And I'll read a little bit about what this book says, but then also we'll share a bit from what the social media friends said as well. So, having found a promising target, a predator begins to set the trap. The trap is the relationship, a fake bond that the predator will act out to gain access to your child. In this first stage of grooming, the main tool would be the abuser uses is compliments, positive attention towards the family, because they also groom the parents often. They groom the community. They gain trust with the parents, which is why the parents say, oh, sure, you can go for a drive, or, oh, sure, you can stay after school, or whatever the case may be. Oh, sure, you can come over and watch our kids. How thoughtful. They groom the parents as well, hoping to create a bond of trust. The predator wants the family to think highly of him and to believe that he admires and cares for them. So what do you think about step one, setting the trap with compliments and building trust first?
Well, I think it's in almost every single one of these stories. It's in my story. It's so dang frustrating. One of the things you said while you were reading that is once they find a promising target, that almost seems like a step one. How do they find that promising target? Because I know for myself and many others, that's one thing of why did they choose me?
Yeah. And I think, in my opinion, it's interesting to think about starting to see if they can build that relationship and if that relationship or that trust can be built. I've heard other stories where it's the child's alone a lot, there isn't consistency at home. Maybe there's chaos at home, and so the child is looking for stability in an adult. There's some kind of risk factors that certainly could put someone in a vulnerable state as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would think access. If they can't have multiple ways of access to that child, then it's probably not going to be a promising target. And then the relationship with the child's parents, if there's a way they can figure that out.
Some of the stories we've heard, it's pastors who volunteer to babysit, or youth leaders, or Boy Scouts, they're at Boy Scout camp, or things like that, where it's the parent believes that the child is in a safe place.
Mm-hmm.
And
because of the title.
Yeah, because of the position, the power, the title. Yeah.
Now, I'll also say that I think Jimmy Hinton, we've had him on our podcast before, and he's talked about his father, who was a pastor for years, who they found out was a pedophile, who had been sexually abusing, they believe, close to hundreds of children within his church. I find it very interesting to point this out because, we think of perpetrators as somebody who makes a mistake, who touches a child, and, they let their earthly desires win for that moment, but that's not really who they are. Listening to Jimmy and his conversations with his father, sometimes the way that the father would pick a child was he just wanted to see what he could get away with in front of the parents. Like, it was like a game. It was like, what can I get away with? And you literally let me touch your child right here in front of you. It was that type of high for him. And so, that's the type of brain we're talking about. Right. It's sick. It's not just a mistake.
No. And most perpetrators don't have just one victim because it's not about love or a relationship. They're not choosing this victim because they truly have a special bond with them. They're choosing who gives them their heart, and that could be multiple people. And if that is stopped, then they'll move on to someone else. And so that's why we will always advocate for perpetrators getting prison time, because there's very little, in my opinion, rehabilitation for a mind like that, because they'll just continue to do it again.
Correct. Yep. Unless it's reached very early on in life.
Now, one of the things I thought was interesting, kind of going back to this book, is she talks about the people that she worked with as being the person next door. your neighbor. Like sometimes think, or at least it can be, it's going to be a grungy alcoholic with facial hair who wears dirty, gross clothes. You kind of picture potentially that type of person being the perpetrator. But she said, clean cut, looks like your local dentist. Like you can't pick them out of a crowd, which is why you have to watch their behavior.
Yeah. And I kind of think of it like this. Like, let's say you have a teeter-totter and you have one side that is literally just full of all these white flags because he's a great guy. He does all of these wonderful things for people. But there might just be one little teeny tiny red flag, but that needs to weigh enough that it completely tips the teeter-totter, because you're not going to see 20 red flags with this guy. You are lucky if you see one. So pay attention to it.
And the first thing is that special attention. It could be, in your case, it was like, oh my gosh, you're great at basketball. Let's get you into the WNBA, and flattery, flattery, flattery.
Love bomb.
Yes, love bombing, which is why we say, although we're kind of talking about child sexual abuse here, this can happen with adults.
Yes.
When you think of narcissistic abuse or domestic violence relationships, you don't choose a relationship that's violent immediately, like off the bat, right? They kind of drag you in and trick you into this relationship before the abuse typically starts. So love bombing is one.
Yeah, this is where like you put the frog in the lukewarm water. Mm-hmm. They've not turned the heat up yet. The frog's just sitting in lukewarm water.
And they're just really working to get that trust first. Step one, trust. And like you've said, they have access to the child's or the client or the person's heart. The second stage is baiting the trap with favors. So if the relationship is the trap, the bait for the trap is favors, because being super helpful makes a friendship harder to resist or walk away from. And there's actually something that's like the law of reciprocity. If somebody does something nice to you, you feel like you owe them in a sense. And so if a perpetrator is babysitting your kids or giving rides or, supporting the single mom at home by bringing food and things like that, the parents feel like this responsibility to kind of say thank you and give back, and loyalty and trust can go up. Once a predator believes that he has earned some level of trust from the adult gatekeeper, he will start to help the child or the family. Offers may include free babysitting, extra time with a predator who the child and family enjoys, or gifts. Families in need of financial or emotional support are at extra risk of the predator's deceiving kindness. In the baiting of the trap stage, a child is also likely to start receiving the predator's direct, personalized attention, including intangible or perhaps tangible gifts. So after the trust of the family and the parents, then the focus goes into the victim, the child at hand.
Yep.
So what did some of the stories say that posted?
Yeah. So, I'll just start at the top so I don't miss any. This one is talking about how she says completely ignoring you in public, but stealing you away for private moments that were quote unquote special and didn't involve physical contact at all at first. So with that, do you feel like that would fit in either? I mean, it's manipulative, it's sneaky, it's mind games, but would that fall in either one of the first?
Yeah. Well, it's that special extra attention.
Yeah.
And what I think is interesting too is when we talk to women now who experienced child sexual abuse, sometimes they knew it was abuse, but oftentimes they believed it was a relationship. Mm-hmm. And so because the heart was stolen, they thought they did feel special, and they felt like the youth leader chose them because of how special they are, or they felt like they didn't quite realize what was going on until they're an adult and go, why would a 30-some-year-old man want to hang out with a 14-year-old,
But even still, as an adult, when it hits you right smack dab in the face, it is a huge, embarrassment's the main word I can think of, to go, oh my goodness, I was that stupid. I was that naive and dumb to think that he really did care about me when he said all those things. And it's just years stolen, and it's so infuriating.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's where this little like side sneaky, like, hey, I got something special for you, that type of stuff makes it feel like it's a relationship.
Yeah. Another lady said a band director who gives you special attention, upgrades, and repairs your instrument without asking, and then asks you to come in after school so he can work one-on-one with you while, quote unquote, checking your breathing while you play the instrument.
Right. That's another point too, is when the abuse actually starts, again, it's all justified. It's
Yes.
all like, oh, we're just doing this little thing here, and this makes sense, and
Yeah, and it desensitizes. What they hope is it desensitizes the girl to the touch, and they can slowly but surely keep turning up that boiling water until it's full blown inappropriate sexual abuse, and then the child feels stuck.
It says the challenge in this stage of grooming is that it's hard for adults to push back against the seemingly wonderfulness of the relationship. The family is getting gifts or food or extra special attention too. And so it can feel like it doesn't seem like a red flag at first.
Yeah, exactly.
Who wouldn't want your band instrument tuned? You know what I mean? And so again, you can see how it tricks everybody involved, not just the victim.
And this particular one, this girl, it's similar to that. She says the perpetrator starts being overly nice, acting extremely interested in your life, and catering to things that you didn't even ask for, almost reading your wants and needs. Then once that trust and bond is established, the devil comes out behind closed doors. Yourself and family members are being threatened also in private, and if you say something, someone will be hurt. And everyone else around you is being told you're crazy and violent. And it's believable because everything happened in private.
Wow.
It's that sheep in wolf's clothing, right, where everybody else sees the sheep.
Yeah. One reason why this is so, like, I get passionate about this is because people do teach stranger danger. And in fact, I have family members who are like teaching their kids that the world is a fearful place to live in and you have to watch out for everybody. But that's not how abuse starts. It's right with this love bombing and the relationship and you're special and I love you and this is you're important to me and here's all these gifts and extra attention. And then once you're close, then they flip the script.
Yep, devil comes out of closed doors. Absolutely. Another girl, she said an example of grooming for her was when he is sitting with you on the school bus to ask you about all of your hopes and dreams and life goals. Seems at the time like they really care about you. I was definitely groomed, but not chosen. I think my parents being so nosy and strict helped a lot, and it made me much less available. Now I am really concerned about coaches and teachers texting kids without having parents on group text and stuff like that, because it can bypass that layer of protection. And one of the things, I think this one's interesting because she feels like she wasn't chosen due to her parents. Mm-hmm. But what I shared with her is even the grooming process is abuse. Mm-hmm. It messes with your head. It causes trauma. And it causes you to question people, to question intentions, to question, are they being nice to me for a particular reason? And then you lose trust in humanity. Like, just grooming itself is abuse, and it can impact you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Stage 3, or the third stage, is rigging the trap with guilt. So if the family's trusting relationship with the predator is the trap that makes abuse possible, the child's relationship with safe adults are the only reliable escape routes. The abuser now intentionally and subtly separates the child from their protective adults, physically and emotionally. After the success of the first and second stages, parents and other protectors already trust this helpful, charming person. The adult barrier has been nudged aside, and the predator homes in directly on the child. What this stage looks like is a special relationship emerging between the predatory adult and the preyed on child. The predator has two angles: to separating the child from protection. One resembles favors of the previous stage, and the other taking a bleaker turn. Usually this stage is still more carrot than stick, with predators luring children with things like mental games, secret bonds, unique experiences. But the would-be sex abuser may also start emotionally manipulating the child, making the child feel guilty for not going along with the abuser's plans, or perhaps ashamed of some of their secret experiences. So this is when separation happens.
Yeah. And each piece of this grooming that they do to speak out. The further they get in this process, the less likely they will say anything.
And this, again, reminds me of a domestic violence situation or a controlling spouse, love bombing, and then the mental games of, the gaslighting's a piece of it too. Like, you're crazy. I'm not mad. You're mad.
Yeah.
This behavior is just fine. And you're like, I don't think so. But the separation, because in domestic violence situations, oftentimes they'll be, they stopped talking to friends. They stopped communicating with parents. They've stopped their kind of normal relationships and have started to withdraw. And you see that here too with children, where they're starting to withdraw. They're letting go of other trusted friendships. Relationships with their parents are starting to separate. And in my opinion, most likely there's a wedge being put in there too, whereas the parent is becoming kind of the bad guy in the situation. And there could even be this, I'm better than your parent. I give you more privileges than your parents. Your parent is mean, things like that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I've heard of stories where, the victims will end up running away from home, running away with the groomer. And it can get that extreme. But if nothing else, it for sure silences them. One of the things that I see on here too with a lot of these stories is particular nicknames. They call the child, their special friend. I see that multiple times, the phrase special friend. And so it makes me wonder, maybe that's something we could start asking our kids. Does anybody think you're their special friend? Are you a special friend to anybody? What does a special friend look like to you? That sort of thing. That could be another great conversation just in case.
Yeah. All right. And then finally, we've got the fourth stage, keeping the trap snapped shut. The turning point to this fourth and final phase is that the sexual abuse begins. The predator snaps the trap to fulfill his primary end, using the child for physical pleasure. It seems like at this stage, the grooming would be considered over, but the predator has not yet fulfilled all his goals and continues grooming as it's essential to his ultimate success. Part of the predator's mission is to not get reported for his crimes or face any consequences. Furthermore, most sex offenders continue their abuse, often with the same child and others. According to statistics, 70% of sex offenders have 1 to 9 victims, and an additional 20% have 10 to 40 victims. That means 90%, and I would venture like more than that even, have more than one victim. It's it's horrible. These are persistent serial criminals. They need to maintain their act, the illusion that they are trustworthy, if they are to maintain their access to children. So even after an assault, the abuser keeps grooming to ensure silence and further ongoing victimization, to avoid detection and to keep the trap shut with his prey inside.
Yep. Oh my goodness. I mean, my head goes to number one, like my perpetrator saying, "Oh, but it was your idea. You're the one that wanted to do this," referring to the sexual abuse that took place and the pictures that he took. So that's a reason for a child to stay quiet. I will get in big trouble. But to boot, whenever I got older and I was not yet out of his access and he wasn't sexually abusing me as often, He still would get me out of class. He still would give me special privileges. Praise me, compliment me. And I can look back now and see that's because he wanted me to remain quiet, didn't want me to come forward about him still. But at the time, I just thought, see, this is real. And even, I kid you not, even as an adult, when I would meet him just in passing at times, he would whisper something in my ear that was complimentary about how I looked or how I smelled or whatever. And so it still was playing that grooming piece.
Yeah. It still was feeding into this I am really special, and this is really
He really does love me. Oh, it just ticks me off.
Yeah, it's which is why oftentimes children don't come forward until they're adults and they start to really realize, oh, this was not a relationship. Oh, this was not. And I have a question for you. So there's a recent case. This girl just turned 13, and she comes up missing. And the story is that the stepfather dropped her off at school, but she never went to school, and the school didn't call the parents for some reason. And so the mom went to pick her up, and she wasn't there. And long story short, they find the 13-year-old has been murdered, and they find her body. And so they start investigating. And they find on this is a stepdad's phone, they find dozens, hundreds of pictures of inappropriate relations with the stepdaughter. And so they've been doing, this is actually where I got this book from, was like they've been doing these interviews talking about this case, what is predator behavior like, all of these things. And one of the things they keep saying is, Maddie just turned 13. Maybe she started to fight back. Maybe she started to say no. Maybe she was pregnant. Like, who knows? But in my mind, I'm thinking, I don't know if a 13-year-old would know to fight back or if they think they're in a relationship. And obviously, every situation is a little bit different. But did she feel special? Did she feel like, if she was truly groomed? In my thought process, I'm like, I don't think she would all of a sudden fight back because she thinks that this is a special thing. Like, you know what I mean? And so do you have any thoughts initially on that?
Well, two thoughts. If it did come to reality of what was going on and she was starting to fight back, I see it as rare. I don't see that as a norm, but it is possible. But at the same time, I think the way that they are trying to logically make sense of what the perpetrator did is wrong. There's nothing logical about a sexual abuser or a murderer. So trying to be like, oh, I bet she started to fight back, and so this is what he had to do because don't try to make logical sense of what he did.
I want to be a panelist on your thing. I have a lot to say about this. And
yeah.
I'm thinking a 13-year-old is emotionally controlled as well. And this perpetrator potentially has her heart too. So there's so many other things that go into this abuse that it's not necessarily as easy to say as, well, I bet she finally said no. I mean, maybe, but my guess is there's a lot of other things at play.
That's my guess too. And I think you had mentioned this to me before about how the book says, don't try to make sense of what the perpetrator's saying or doing.
No, we've said this before. You can't make sense of evil. Like, it doesn't make sense. No. We do not need to figure out why a predator does this, what they're thinking. They don't live in the same world.
Oh my goodness. And think of it this way too. So sorry I cut you off.
Go ahead.
The news is now making it seem, sorry, but the news, it's almost like, oh, she fought back. She ended up murdered. So what does that tell other kids or people who have been abused and groomed? Oh my goodness. If I ever speak up, I will be murdered. If I ever fight back, I will be murdered. So it is best to stay silent.
Yeah, not accurate. Yeah, it's oh, there was something I was about to say, but now I forget. Oh,
Sorry.
because it's not about why. We're not going to get into the mind of a predator. The question to ask ourselves is how. And that's why we go through these 4 stages of how a predator, and this is why you wrote your book, Reflecting Ownership, how a predator gains control of your heart first. And then your mind, you start thinking, how can I make the predator like me today? How can I be a good enough person? Like, how can I get that praise? Intermittent reinforcement is the strongest form of reinforcement. That love bombing and then withdrawing is a huge, you want that praise. So it really builds a strong emotional bond, be it not healthy, but it does increase the strength of that bond because you want that approval. And then the abuse comes down the line once that trust has been built and the heart has been stolen.
And I think that's the piece of my book that most people connect with the most. Like it's like an aha moment for them, whether they're an adult when the abuse and grooming took place or whether they were a kid. That's what I hear the most is me too on that. And it's reassuring to know it wasn't their fault.
Right. Because I think, like you said at the beginning, why was I chosen? Why did this happen to me? And the reality is because the predator is a great manipulator and built trust with not just the victim, but with the community and family too.
Yeah. I mean, and I'll say, it's hard when you do finally come forward, when everybody that you know has loved and trusted this individual and you have experienced this dark side of them. I've heard things such as, he just wasn't giving you the attention you wanted, so you are out to get him. And it just doesn't work that way. Out of the blue, some woman in her adult years isn't going to just decide to come back and be out to get, her teacher from years ago.
No.
Believe them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Anything else stand out from the social media posts?
You can hear the heartbreak as they explain it, but also, I gotta say, I do posts quite often. This is one of the most most feedback I've gotten, that they want to share. They want people to know, and I think that's so powerful. They want others to understand the signs of it, but they also want to share their story. This one was interesting. She said, the grooming process was actually very simple. My parents didn't allow me to eat a lot of candy as a child, but he let me ride in the front seat shotgun and bought me a huge bag of candy. He convinced me again to take some from the store without paying because he thought it was funny. It doesn't take much to persuade children, especially when the groomer seems to be nicer and more fun than the person you would go to tell on them. Also, nobody likes a tattletale, was said often.
Oh, wow. Right. That's interesting to think about too, is the grooming process. And it makes it sound like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 could take months or years, or it could take days.
Yeah.
Weeks, where you give attention and trust is built, and now, it doesn't necessarily have to take forever.
And getting them to do something that's quote unquote wrong. I mean, one of those shows that you and I watched recently, the perpetrator was running away with the girl and she was ready to go back. Like she didn't want to go, but he had her switch out license plates. And so that with a different vehicle. And then he tells her, that was illegal. You're going to jail too, just like me. Well, now she doesn't want to, escape and go back home.
Right. And now they have a secret.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I hope this conversation was helpful. If you have a grooming story or something that resonates with you or that you want to share, please post in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. This is a conversation to be had, not only here on the podcast, but also with our families. It's not just stranger danger. In fact, most of the time it isn't. 90% of, 93% of child abuse victims know and trust their abuser. So it's really taking a look at who is in the life of your child that has access that potentially has their heart. And of course, not every one that's befriending your family is a bad guy, but no adult should really want alone time with a child. And there is never a need for secrets, even between a parent and child, right? Secrets
Yes.
are unnecessary. And so keep a lookout for that. Anything you want to add before we say goodbye?
I appreciate all of the people who did respond to this post and share their story. It's powerful and it's helpful.
Yes. Let's keep the conversation going. We have a couple speaking engagements and a retreat coming up. So we've got a lot of fun stuff happening here at Stop SIS. If you are interested in learning more about our programs, check out stopsuffering.org. Be sure to like, comment, and engage with our content. We'll be opening up the doors to some more programs in the next few months here. But we've got a special event coming up. Not only are we traveling to Delaware and in Pennsylvania, we've got 3 speaking engagements with law enforcement and social workers, pastors in the community, church members, etc. But we also have a retreat coming up for our survivors. So we're doing a lot of fun stuff in the next few weeks. All right. With that being said, have an awesome night, you guys, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this powerful episode of Stop Suffering in Silence. If you are interested in booking Rachel to speak at your event, workshop, school, church, or organization, then please email racheltimothy.stopsis@gmail.com. If you are interested in donating to the Stop SIS ministry, then please check out the link in the description box or show notes below. Or you can email stopsis@protonmail.com. And finally, if you are currently suffering in silence or you know somebody who is, then check out our website, stopsuffering.org, to learn more about our online programs and resources. We will always recommend that you also reach out to your local resources and find a counselor that you can trust, because nobody is meant to suffer alone. Have an amazing week, and thank you for being here.